Hello, and welcome to the Eco D2C podcast, where we break down the growth strategies behind successful and natural eco-based companies. My name is Luke, and I'm really excited about today's episode. Today we have Sam Hager from Dash Applications. Sam is a well of knowledge in regards to Amazon and is a phenomenal marketer. I've had the pleasure of collaborating with him in the past, and I'm thrilled to have him here. Sam, how are you doing today?
Good, man. Thanks for having me, Luke. Really appreciate it. I mentioned this is my first time doing a podcast, so I'll be learning along the way, but I really appreciate you having me.
Excellent. I'm so happy you're here. So before business, can you tell us something interesting about you that most people don't know?
That's a little on the spot. Yes, I think I grew up in North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately moved to New York City pretty shortly after graduating college.
Mm-hmm.
And the apartment building I lived in had more people than the hometown I grew up in.
Oh, wow.
So that was a little bit of a shocker for me, but that's kind of one of my go-tos when I get the something interesting, I guess. So small town kid, have tried out a few big cities, landed here in Denver, Colorado now, and it's definitely home.
Do you mind if I ask how many people were in the apartment building? I'm also from a super small town.
Yeah, the apartment building is about 2,200 people, and I grew up in a town of less than 1,500.
That is, you and I have that in common.
Yeah, yeah. So it was definitely a little bit of a shift for me.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I don't even now living in an apartment building of 2,200 sounds interesting.
It's a small city, man. It's a small city. Yeah.
All right. So can you tell us just a little bit about Dash?
Yeah, absolutely. So Dash is an applications company. I mean, we are intending to be a software company first and foremost. My business partner and I, Todd Vanderstelt, he's a former Amazonian, was at Amazon for 6 years, worked on a lot of great projects there, including the Hands Off the Wheel program, which some of the vendors out there might know about. That was his program that he pioneered within Amazon. He and I have been working together for about almost 3 years, a little over 3 years now. And we built a couple agencies that had a major Amazon services component to them. And along the way, we always knew that software was going to be an important part of what we did, because there's just, there's hurdles for scale and efficiency in agencies that, really just kind of thwart growth. And we really wanted to attack those problems after having experienced them firsthand. And so our half of the business of Dash Applications, we have some other partners that are working on other software applications, but we're focusing on Amazon specifically. So we started with the advertising API because that was the most stable data source that we had to work with. Also recognize that agencies can provide a ton of value there for their clients and brands. So we started with working on some of the analytics that we were doing constantly for our own clients, really being able to drive down deep into the numbers and answer questions when, our biweekly or monthly calls were coming up, to craft that narrative and tell the story of what's going on and whether or not strategy that we've implemented is actually working. There were a lot of manual processes that we had built on top of Excel and static data sets and things that, just eventually break at scale, that just at some point you can't keep up with the manual nature of it. And so we started, knocking out some of those things that we found were the most painful. And that's kind of how Dash Applications was born, is just to solve all the pain and anguish that we had kind of experienced on the service side of things.
Now, as an Amazon consultant myself, I can speak to how much of a lifesaver it can be, especially for large accounts, to have software that really just streamlines the process, and both on the part of just doing your job and implementing a lot of these things, and also explaining it in a concise way to the client is crucial.
Yeah. It's one of those things. At some point, you just have to look for things that are going to help you scale. And we just looked out in the market, and we didn't really have those things at our disposal. We weren't necessarily developers ourselves, nor data scientists, and so we had to leverage some developers to help us get it off the ground. But we had a pretty clear vision of what we needed to make it work, and so that was that's where we started.
So with Dash, you talk a lot about diving into data analytics and drivers of change. Can you describe what some of those major drivers are to those who are unfamiliar with the platform?
Yeah,
or
and
looking to scale on the platform?
yeah, not to get too far into the weeds, but the basic application is like, look, when you have numbers and you're an agency or a brand and you're looking and you're trying to say like, hey, okay, happened this month versus last month,
Mm-hmm.
and we ourselves trying to look across all of our campaigns, our ad groups, our keywords, and looking at it and saying, okay, what actually drove that change? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and 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 so we're looking at metrics like spend and sales and ACOS, but also down into conversion rates, CPC, CTR, things like that. And had really implementing this concept called a bridge, which is commonly used in finance to
Mm-hmm.
basically look at one period of time of performance over another period of time and understand what actually changed in between that and what actually might
Mm-hmm.
have been the drivers of those things. And so we built that out for Amazon, and we do it both for operational data as well as advertising data. So that includes things like buy box and sessions, as well as on the ad side, your, like I said, the ACOS and the
Mm-hmm.
spend and sales. And the idea there is that when you are walking into a meeting with your clients or you're walking into a meeting with your stakeholders at your brand, they're going to ask questions and
Mm-hmm.
you want to have the answers to the questions. Okay, so our conversion rate dipped by 5%. Why? So what we
Mm-hmm.
can do with that bridge is you can download the bridge, and basically it's going to tell you exactly what contributed to that change and in what proportion. So whether
Mm-hmm.
that's a certain campaign or maybe a couple of keywords, let's say all of a sudden somebody started conquesting your brand terms on Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to see that relative CPC increase down to the keyword level of which terms that they're targeting. And you can
Mm-hmm.
immediately identify where you're getting some of that, some of those degradations are coming through. So we think it's a really powerful thing. It was just something that we did all the time, to start having those conversations with our clients. And it really enables you to just be the smartest person in the room
Mm-hmm.
as you're getting asked these questions. And sometimes you get some pretty intricate questions like what's
Mm-hmm.
actually happening here, and we wanted to have those answers at hand. And so that's where the bridge development came from.
Excellent. So there's a lot that we could get into regarding Amazon. Today, specifically, I would like to dive into how the marketplace is changing and how this affects marketing strategy for brands both large and small. And so you and I have discussed various angles of this
Mhm.
particular issue, but just for just to just to take a step back and for everybody listening, how in your eyes is the marketplace changing and evolving? Because it's not the same place it was 3 and 4 years ago.
Yeah, and everybody's going to have a different perspective of this depending on when they came onto Amazon, for what intention, and what angle they're coming at it from. But from our standpoint, relatively speaking, I think the days of arbitrage and finding a niche that just hasn't been exploited yet, and being able to white label a product from China and slap on a sticker and a brand and throw it on Amazon and be successful, I think those days are pretty much over.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly because those niches have already been exploited or found. The speed to manufacture for folks is really, really quick with the Alibaba Expresses of the world. And so, I think the way to compete now and in the way that the marketplace has changed is that it's going to reward those folks that have a coordinated strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And for those that got in early and built reviews, that's a competitive advantage that probably isn't going to be overcome. For those that are now
Mm-hmm.
entering the marketplace and are trying to succeed, maybe it's a small brand against a big one, which we've talked about a little bit. Um, you got to start by building a great product. That's first and foremost. You can't get around that, because at the end of the day, most of that conversion and most of your fighting chance is going to be predicated on your ability to get really good reviews,
Mm-hmm.
and be able to compete on price or other value props that other people haven't really focused on yet. So I think it's to be successful today, you have to have a brand strategy beyond just I'm going to find this product that nobody else has done yet and throw it on Amazon and hope that it works. And
Mm-hmm.
and that means probably having a D2C site. It probably means having some marketing budget that a lot of the small brands really just don't yet understand, um, how much of a strategy that they have to have in place to be successful. Meaning, like, you can't just throw $500 at ads and hope that you're going to be on first page for
Yep.
some high volume term. Like that's not going to happen anymore. And so you have to be able to last, through the initial stages of, your inventory turns and maybe not happening as fast as you thought, where you don't have enough cash flow to play with some of the marketing things you want to do. You really got to plan for those things, and you got to understand where your break even points are at as you start to accelerate, and really just, it's really about having some cash flow to play with so that you can actually go make some progress and some momentum and understand whether or not you have something worth pursuing.
Mm-hmm. Right. So assuming we're discussing a brand that has a good product, because this marketing budget question comes up a lot. Would you say that there's a minimum pay to play when it comes to Amazon ads? And if so, what?
Yeah.
And this does depend on category, but what if you were starting a brand on Amazon? What is the minimum that you'd want to have to throw at it?
$100,000. No, I mean, as much as you'll give me. No, I would love a ton of money. I think what it really comes down to, Luke, and like you said, number one, context is really important here. That the category is going to matter. So when you look at the category and you look at the first page of Amazon, and you're trying to figure out, well, how much are my competitors doing in relative sales volume? There's some tools out there that will actually tell you that. There's some Chrome extensions and things like that you can dig into those numbers a little bit, at least directionally, to understand. Because the two things you really need to understand there are, number one, how much volume are they doing on a unit basis? Because if you can't get close to that, if you're not even close yet, you got a long ways to go. And you got to figure out how to get there, because the rankings are going to be highly predicated on unit volumes on a day-to-day and then moving average basis, and then your conversion rates and your reviews. So if you're not converting at a high rate, if you're not, if your volume isn't at least in the ballpark of the first page, you're probably not going to stick there for a while. So when you talk about marketing budgets, I always say, what would it take for you to win those terms consistently? And how many conversions do you need to get to make a difference? So here, a practical example would be, let's say you've got $1,000 and it's about $1 a click. So you can get 100 clicks, you can get 1,000 clicks at $1 a click, and you're going to convert 10% of the time. So you can get 100 orders. Does 100 orders move the needle for a given keyword search term? If it does, that's enough budget. But at the end of the day, what I think what a lot of folks make the mistake of is that they say, okay, I have $1,000 to spend, and I'm going to spend that $1,000 across the 10 or 20 products that I have in my catalog. The problem with that is that you are spreading yourself so thinly that you're not having any relative or any, you're not really having any kind of significant impact on the unit volumes relative to your competitors. So if you're only getting onesie twosie conversions across all of your products in your ads, it may look really good, but you're probably not having a large impact on the algorithm, the search algorithm, to say like, oh, this product is converting at a really high rate and its unit volume is relatively close, excuse me, to that first or second page of results. And therefore it's really just not going to make that much of a difference. So you just spent $1,000 in advertising to really not change the game at all for you. So I think what's more important is focusing that spend into a product that's going to make sense. And you can have, number one, you've got some good reviews to start with. Like, don't market before you've got decent reviews that are going to compete well when they're put up against all your other competitors.
So let's pause there for a second, because that's a really important point. So you're suggesting that before launching Amazon PPC efforts at all, having how many reviews that are just glowing? And tapping your friends and family to have at least 5 to 10. What number are you thinking of here?
Yeah. And I wrote an article about this too, because I think it's one of those things, like, if you're going to spend $1,000, where are you going to spend it? If you don't have the reviews yet, spend your efforts there, even if it's not monetary. I said in the article, I think it's somewhere around 10 really good reviews. Now that's huge caveat, right? It depends on who you're competing against and what the category looks like. But, I would say get as many 5-star reviews as you can up front, even if it's 5 or 10, which Amazon has the early reviewer program, which you can get up to 5 reviews through. Those first couple reviews have to be really good, and they matter because they're going to help, just mitigate some of the, unfortunately bad reviews that will inevitably come through. So 5 to 10 before you start advertising, because without any reviews, you're just not going to convert. You're throwing money into a black hole.
And before jumping back into ad discussion, so I can already hear a lot of the questions that I often get when this topic is brought up of, like if they're, if someone is putting money into getting reviews, what exactly do you mean by that? What, are we talking email drip sequences? Are we talking ManyChat, type messenger flows on Facebook? Are we talking sort of gray hat review groups? What do you in particular have in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't recommend anything gray hat. But at this, because it's one of those things where you don't want to get your account suspended. You got to be careful, and you definitely have to abide by the terms and guidelines of the community. But I think what's been most effective is certainly friends and family. Like, people miss this, which is give them, you can't necessarily give them a code for a review, but you can say, hey, can you help me out? And just getting those initial ones from your if you can get 10 to 20 from your people, all the better. And it's going to give you a huge first step in actually being able to build some momentum on the platform. What I recommend, and I think the building a chat workflow is probably pretty ambitious for an early brand that, has probably just a few people in-house and doesn't have that competency to build out. The simplest one is, in the short term, you can literally message you can message every customer through Amazon's messaging interface. If you can do it manually and sustainably, do it. And just be like, hey, what do you think of our product? We would love if you left a review and let us know what you thought. Those kinds of follow-ups will go through an email. And, once you are getting to some scale, I mean, you can certainly implement a third-party email tool. Actually, one of the tools that we've worked with before, it's one of our partners of Dash, is called Feedback Whiz. And I just saw in their product release that came out that they now allow you to send specific emails to first-time purchasers versus second, third, fourth, fifth time purchasers.
Oh, that's a nice caveat.
Which is
having the service.
Yes, huge. That is a massive benefit, because when they're a first-time customer, you can talk to them in a way that makes sense for your brand, and you can nurture that customer to just win somebody that is going to be loyal to your brand for a long, long time, and is going to actually make all of this effort worth it. So, definitely email drip campaigns, I think, is the best way to go about it early on, and talk to your customers. I mean, they are going to give you so much good information, and they do a lot of that through feedback and reviews. And the brands that I've seen do it really well are the ones that jump on any kind of customer service complaints immediately. Just do not let those hang. Talk to every single customer that you can early on. If you do nothing else, do 2 things. Number 1, keep your inventory in stock, because you cannot win Amazon without that. And number 2, talk to your customers. Do not allow some issue that even maybe Amazon created through fulfilling improperly to fester and turn into a bad review, because that is a really hard thing to get over in the early stages.
Yep. Just to clarify a couple of things for listeners, because we're moving through quite a few things pretty quickly here. So when what Sam is talking about in reference to messaging your customers on Amazon directly through Amazon system, you can do that through Seller Central, and you do want to be very careful not to directly incentivize them.
Correct.
To to leave those reviews. Like it is entirely okay to say, and this is very easily Googled. You can say like, hey, we would love your feedback. What you cannot say is like, hey, we will give you a discount or anything of that nature.
Right.
Um, but reaching out to customers, highly recommended. Just be very careful about how you word it, because if you word it in the wrong way and Amazon catches it, they will flag and potentially suspend your account. So I just wanted to make sure to make that clear. And the email sequence campaigns that we are referring to refer to a lot of people use Feedback Genius or AMZ Mailer or any number of other services. And basically, this is an automated email sequence that goes out to customers who are purchasing your product on Amazon. I personally have not worked with one that Sam just mentioned. Feedback Wiz, you said?
Correct. Yep. And I've got a promo code for folks if they'd like it. It's you get 30 days free, I think, when you sign up.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got a code that we can share in the notes, I think maybe afterward, that is 50% off your first month. So
excellent.
You can at least try it out and see if you get any traction from it.
What do you think about how a lot of, and we will wrap this around to ads here in a little bit, but what do you think about all the companies that are canceling their email drip sequences because they're seeing so many customers opt out of receiving emails from sellers at all? Because that's a fairly high number of people these days.
Make it valuable. I mean, when you're talking to your customers, don't spam them. Like make it worth their while to open it. I mean, let them know that you're there to help if they have any issues with their order. Maybe even surprise them with a gift, something like a sampler or a percentage off, not for a review. But just you guys have inboxes. Like I have 5 different email addresses that I monitor. Right. And so the things that I open are the things that are valuable to me. And that seems, it's really like, it's a little bit of a cop out to say that, but I mean, if you were act as though you were the customer, what would you want to see from this brand that you had never interacted before? If they are in fact already opted out and you didn't have much to do with that, it's just part of the game, man. I don't really know how to get around that, truthfully. And it's, but people don't generally opt. I mean, and they can't technically opt out of order related info. So, if it's order related, and I don't know the specifics around how they determine what's order related versus, what are like marketing emails, but, certainly something to look into. I mean, you have to be able to communicate really important information to your clients or your customers. So, it's just part of the game, unfortunately.
What size companies do you see using ManyChat Flow successfully? Because I certainly hear a lot of news about this from Amazon, seller communities that are especially focused around sort of like hacking the channel and things like this. And the open rates of receiving messages through Messenger are way higher than email, and there's no opt-out. But, and this might be news for some people listening, Amazon is might be changing soon. They've announced they're going to change, but they haven't changed it yet. There was a date that passed, but the way that we access information on Amazon to be able to even do follow-up with customers on Facebook Messenger might be altered in some really dramatic ways in the relatively near future. So depending on what time you're listening to this, it might be relevant, it might not be, or it might just be very changed, which is the nature of Amazon at this moment in time. But what is a scenario in which you would recommend using that tool, if you recommend using that tool?
So I haven't used that one in particular, but I know people are doing it in a couple different ways. It's not technical. I mean, this is a tough gray area. I think there's a lot of companies trying to figure out how to leverage the audience data in Amazon, including your orders, literally your customer list coming out of the orders reports that you can both download in Amazon as well as comes through the MWS API. But this is one where I don't know enough about it to say yay or nay. Like if you should or should not. I think because of what we saw happen in Germany, that's what I've heard, is that it stemmed in Germany from Germany actually has, what we heard was that they were suing Amazon because of the use of that private data. And that's what kind of sparked this maybe pullback on showing the first name, last name, and address of the customers in those FBA orders, which you still have to use that information one way or the other, because there's a bunch of fulfillment things that have to happen, especially if you're merchant fulfilling. So I think there's still going to be some potential to do that. I think that Amazon is probably just going to have to come out and say, like, yes, you can do this. No, you can't. They know it's happening. There's no doubt that they know it's happening. They just can't track it. If they were smart, they would probably just build their own, and they might be working on that. I think from a size of company, it's like, look, if you have the competency and the time and resource to be able to do it, try it. You didn't hear that from me because I don't actually know how that aligns with the terms of service with Amazon. But I know that there's a few companies that have built solutions around this very thing, including the one you mentioned. Give it a shot. It's certainly a good way to talk to your customers. I don't know enough about it to give you good advice one way or the other. Sorry.
That's totally fair.
Yeah.
So just to wrap this background of the process that we were going through, and correct me if and when I miss something here, but for brands that are measuring the channel, trying to get onto the platform, you recommend in this order first measuring your space, seeing what unit velocity you would have to really have in order to compete for the keywords that are important in your category. Investing in reviews from the outset, having 5, ideally 10 strong reviews that will help you convert more traffic, and then depending on your space, depending on some of these other calculations that you've done, diving into Amazon PPC. Or am I getting something wrong there?
I think there's probably a couple interim steps. I mean, the PPC makes sense when you know that you're going to convert on your page. And so that reviews are first and foremost the largest piece of that, I think. Because great reviews can overcome a whole lot of other sins, including like poor content and, maybe premium pricing for a non-premium product. Like, great reviews can overcome a ton of things and actually can lead to a whole lot thicker margins for your brand. Can't understate the importance of that. It's like the one thing on Amazon that can't be taken away from you. Well, if you didn't go get robo reviews, of course. But it's like the one thing that allows really great products and brands that are maybe just starting out and getting into the category late to actually compete. But I would say, Luke, there's the one thing that I think you have an opportunity early on to experiment a little bit with your listing. And what I mean by that is you're going to write your content as best you can. And it's going to be based on very little information because you just don't have much to work with yet. If you've been around for a while, if you've already got data from your PPC, things like that, you can use all those different data points. But what I would recommend in the first couple of months is really look at opportunities to optimize for conversion rate. So what I mean is if you have a steady flow of people and your conversion rate is relatively high or low to the category, to what you see on your own website, to what you think it should be, start poking around on things that maybe are barriers for conversion on your page. That could include not really explaining how to use the product that you're showing. Maybe it's maybe there are a couple reviews already that are kind of telling you what people actually really care about. Focus on those things. Go look at your competitors' listings and see what are the things that most commonly get asked about because they're not clear. What are the most common things that get harped on because they're poor quality or poor aspects of the product of your competitor? Those are really good opportunities to exploit because it's just, you're looking at it and going, well, if I speak to that point, people, when they're relatively comparative shopping, other things, held equal, are probably going to go to the one that actually speaks to that pain point. That, remember, a customer on Amazon went there to find something that is fulfilling a need, or what we would call like a job for them. And you probably have that product. You just have to tell them that it solves their job, which is kind of benefits-based copy. To do this scientifically early on, you have a little bit more of a leash to do this, because if you change your listing content way down the road when you've already built a ton of momentum, there's a much higher risk that you're going to mess up the indexing within the algorithm. So you can do this early on. The other piece of data, or the layer that is really, really nice to have, is the PPC data, because you are going to know, based on the keywords that you're targeting, exactly what rate you convert at on that keyword. And you don't get that data anywhere else. So it's almost worth having $500 to $1,000 per product per ASIN to go experiment early on specific keywords to understand. And I would look at it as trade spend. Like, this is an investment. It's not to hit a 10% ACOS off the bat.
Right.
It's $1,000 to figure out how you can optimize your product page to literally go make you 100,000 in the next, 6, 7, 10 months. Right. Like that's the point, is that you have to look at it as an investment to do data discovery that's going to inform you how to shape and message your detail pages in a way that actually makes sense and is converting on the things that matter.
And for using, for using PPC in this way to discover, what keywords you're converting well for, what keywords you could be converting better for, that maybe you'd like to target. How, obviously, in the beginning, when you're looking at competitor reviews and you're mining competitor listings for data, and you can pull some tricks with some tools out there to see what keywords are likely converting for, things like this. That can be done right at the outset when you're optimizing a listing. But as time goes on, how is there a general benchmark that you have for now is good to do a review to see, what keywords we might want to, display more prominently in the listing? Is that something you recommend doing periodically to review it? Is this something you would only do that would be triggered by hey, our conversion rate's pretty low, what's going on? There's a lot of factors at play, but would you recommend this as I launched onto Amazon 3 months ago, I have all this data, we're going to re-optimize, and then we don't have to worry about it? Or is this something you'd recommend doing, say, every quarter? And I know it's a big question.
It's a great question. I mean, there's a ton of different triggers that could inform this. I think a couple things. Number one, if you just aren't seeing enough sales, great trigger. Go figure out why. Right. And conversion rate is the first place you should start. Why are we not converting on the things that we should? The other triggers are when you are running your ads, whoever is running your ads should kind of have that running list of keywords that maybe aren't performing as well as they should be, or relative to the rest of your set. And you're saying look, we're getting served on this, or maybe we're not even getting served on this yet because we haven't had enough conversions for the ad server to say oh, this makes sense for that keyword. Because if you don't have those conversions, or you're not making those keywords or metadata clear in your listing, you won't get served for it in the first place. So there actually might be some hidden keywords that you're why am I not showing up for this? So a really good way to do that, and I guess I'm kind of making this up on the fly, but when you do your initial listing, you should have a list of maybe 5 to 15 what we would call your head terms, the keywords that you think are most important. And basically, those are the ones that are going to be the most commonly searched, have the highest volume of visitors, customers on them, as well as those that are most core to your category and are defining of your product. So those will generally cover the vast, the 80 to 90% of search terms or search phrases, what people are actually searching into Amazon to find your products. These are the terms that are going to cover that. So when you have that list, I would do a periodic review, maybe once every other month, maybe every 3 months, so to the quarter basis, and check to see what your conversion rates against those terms are. And what you're going to also do is, it's not just conversion rates, it's probably also am I getting served on this term? A little hard to know how much volume is out there to actually understand well, what's my impression share? Amazon doesn't give you any of that info right now. You can kind of get into it from some other tools. But if you look at it and you go, man, that should be a more highly searched term, or we should be getting served on that. That's a good trigger to say oh, on the terms that really matter for my product, these are the ones that are not working very well. Another piece of data that's pretty important is to look at where you're ranking on those terms. So you have the 5 terms that matter most to you. Monitor this. And there are tools out there that do keyword tracking
Mm-hmm.
that will allow you to actually see, like, over time, am I improving my organic ranking? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about on Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
is, are you visible for the things that really matter for your product when
Mm-hmm.
people are searching those keywords into the search bar? If you are not showing up in the first couple pages, that's probably a really good indicator that you need to go optimize for that and start
Mm-hmm.
boosting volume on that keyword specifically, which can be done in a couple different ways. So long-winded way to say, I think it's, relative to where you started, are you improving,
Mm-hmm.
and as you're growing volume and you're getting more and more new customers there, sometimes conversion rates are going to drop because relatively, like, you're growing a huge audience that is maybe a little less qualified and doesn't know about your brand yet. So there's some ways to cut through that noise, and it really comes back to the ad data. So compare it against those terms that are really important,
Mm-hmm.
periodically, and say, like, are we performing how we expected to perform?
Right. And so there's a couple things that come to mind. Some things that I know sellers are going to run into. One, uh, measuring what your conversion rate is, and having how would you personally set the bar for knowing whether or not your conversion rate is low or high? Because this is something that sellers really struggle with, to know, like, how they're comparing what it should be. Amazon has conversion rates that are famously higher than other platforms,
Mm-hmm.
but within your own category, it varies widely.
Yes.
Widely between categories. Sorry, I misspoke there. So we can look up generalities between categories depending on where we are. Would you recommend simply using some of these Chrome extension tools that you talked about, where you can do some pretty granular analysis of how much what your competitor's estimated revenue is,
Mm-hmm.
how many units they're moving? Is that the benchmark that you would measure against of the products that are the most similar to yours on Amazon? Or is there another tool that you would recommend using to know what your target conversion rate is?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good place to start with your
Mm-hmm.
competitor data, to just say, like, are we even in the ballpark right now of, the units that we should be at? Because if you're showing up for impressions and on those really key terms and you're not converting, you're probably not going to be close on a unit volume standpoint. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you're likely not going to be able to back into conversion rates for them,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately. So I mean, it's all going to be based kind of on your own benchmark. So you got a couple different places of information for that. Number one, your own website. So what's your conversion rate on your own website? Probably going to be quite a bit lower than
Mm-hmm.
Amazon. I would expect Amazon to be at least a 3 to 5x,
Yep.
on conversion rate relative to your website. You might have some Google search ad data to tell you what the conversion rates are. And then I think more importantly is just relative to yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
at this phase, when you first launched, what was your conversion rate? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Is that relatively improving? And like I said, in the operations data, if you are growing a ton of sessions month over month, your conversion rates are naturally going to drop, simply
Yeah.
because you just have a ton more new eyeballs on the listing that are learning about your brand. So the better way to do that is to use the PPC data and just
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, for these keywords that I've been targeting for the last 3 months, am I getting better on these conversion rates or not? And there's obviously, some fluctuations within that, and there's some caveats to be had. But those are, if you really want to get scientific about it, that's where I would benchmark the conversion rates and say, are we getting better or worse?
And I mean, this is an interesting thing to get into, because especially when you're talking about PPC, and especially when you're talking about um, head terms, the when we're talking with brands about what keywords they should be paying attention to, you mentioned, like the 5 to 10, like you identified as like most important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like, and please correct me or please jump in if you disagree, but there's there's a very big difference between identifying these are the long tail keywords, or even the head terms, if we can do it, which is difficult, that we know we're going to convert for consistently because we have enough data in the PPC. We've been running these campaigns for long enough to really know where we're at with them right now, and then we might re-optimize to try to increase our ranking for certain long tail keywords, especially. But doing this for head terms, because I can see a lot. I mean, a lot of listeners, hearing this and being like, well, like I know what the head terms are in my category, and they're featured prominently in my listing, and I was doing either I can't get, I'm not getting the conversions for them, or I was getting the conversions for them, and then all of a sudden, like, I'm getting blown out of the water by the competition on ad
Mhm.
budget,
Mhm.
or any number of fluctuations that happen because head terms are finicky.
Yeah.
Um, so so when you say those 5 to 10 keywords, are you talking about long tail specifically and head terms if you can get it, or are you just talking about this in a much broader sense?
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that too, Luke. This is kind of what we talked about the other week, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
I'm speaking in generalities because
Mm-hmm.
the reality is that if you are in a really competitive category, you are not going to compete on those head terms right away. And it's probably because your competitors just are, number one, a way more established brand,
Mm-hmm.
that you are just not going to get the brand name recognition and that boost of conversion on
Mm-hmm.
that sole fact. Number two is that you have to look at your reviews and price point relative to the competitors that you're getting surfaced against. So
Mm-hmm.
if you are not even in the ballpark of, the reviews and price point that your competitors are listing at,
Mm-hmm.
you need to take a step back and start growing your brand presence and and focus on converting on some things that you can win. So what we had kind of talked about was, if the head terms are out of reach right now because I've only got
Mm-hmm.
$1,000 and the CPC all of a sudden jumped to $4 and it's not even close to profitable on this product,
Mm-hmm.
even over the lifetime value of the product, which is something that I talk about a lot
Yep.
with our clients. But if you're not in that ballpark and you're not seeing success on the head terms or what would be the most important stuff, my recommendation is to go find the things that, number one, you are showing signs of life on,
Mm-hmm.
and number two, that you think might be good opportunities based on what you found in your other channels or just what is the really core component of your product. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying don't spend on the head terms right away.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is keep your bids relatively low if you know you can't compete yet on
Yep.
those head terms, right? Then take the majority of your budget and go focus it on the stuff that is working so far and
Mm-hmm.
dominate it. So when we
Right.
talked about the rank tracking, if you can find the 5 to 10 long tail keywords that are maybe way more specific from a feature standpoint, and so let's say you're in the water bottle category, right?
Mm-hmm.
Huge category, major players in it, Hydro Flask, Simple Modern, all these others, right? And you come up with a brand new bottle that's going to change the game, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't have the 3,000 or 4,000 reviews that these other listings have, and you need to start somewhere. So let's say it is let's say it measures the water maybe it's a smart bottle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the way that you're going to go do it is like, well, you're not going to win water bottle off day one. What you need to go win is smart bottle or smart bottle with water drinking tracking,
Sure.
so look and if you're using some auto campaigns or some broad match in your keyword in your advertising, you're
Mm-hmm.
going to find what those qualifiers are around the head terms, or that are modifying, like really getting deep into what it really describes your product. Go win those first. And
Mm-hmm.
what this does is it's not just, hey, I'm going here because I can win. You are now not only giving Amazon signals that you can convert on ads, but you're also
Mm-hmm.
telling them that for these keywords, I'm super relevant. And so what it allows them to do is, if you have that rank tracking set on these keywords that we kind of just described,
Mm-hmm.
if you can go dedicate budget to that and then start seeing the needle move on those keywords, what you're
Mm-hmm.
allowing yourself to do is you don't have to pay for those placements forever. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you can go win the first spot on some of those long tail stuff, now all of a sudden you go from this baseline of sales to this baseline of sales every month
Mm-hmm.
that you didn't have to pay for. And that is going to allow you to go compete relatively, both because now Amazon knows you exist, they know you're converting well. It's going to give you so many more efficiencies to go compete on the head terms. So to summarize, when you are early and you can't compete on head terms and you can't even spend there because you're not indexed, go find the stuff that you can dominate and
Yep.
win the first page for that stuff first. That's going
Mm-hmm.
to allow you to go leverage other things and actually move on and start swinging upward at those head terms.
Yep. No, I agree 100%. I think a lot of I think a sticking point that a lot of companies find themselves in when they're going after long tail keywords is there really is by definition so much traffic those keywords are getting. And so even if they are dominating it, they might not be, uh, using all of their budget, or they might just be there's only so much traffic that all these are going to get. So there's only so many sales you're going to be able to get from it. Um, Personally, when it comes to those scenarios, I mean, really, just I believe it just comes down to patience. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I think it comes down to patience, and I think it comes into just investing in as much as you can afford early on, so you have the data to really make those decisions.
Yeah, patience is a big piece of it. I mean, we talked about it kind of at the top of the call, right? Which is
Mm,
you have to be able to weather the storm.
yeah.
The spend you put out there right away is not going to return profitably. It's just
Hmm.
not. And so even more than patience is probably expectation.
Right.
So if you're working with a client or you are the brand on Amazon, you need to be realistic about what your expectations are. And the way that you can be realistic and understand where you fit is to go get some of that competitor data and say, well, where are they at? How many
Hmm.
reviews do they have? What's their brand presence? How much are they spending, do we think? Get really realistic about what they are doing to be successful, and then look at your cash flow and your marketing budget and your review count and say, well, okay, we've got a long ways to go.
Hmm.
To your point about being patient early on, I think it's take the wins where you can get them, but know
Hmm.
that like you have to play the long game. And this also, per our earlier conversation, like you are not just going to drop on Amazon and win the category right away. It
Yeah.
just doesn't happen anymore. And frankly, it's very rare that a product is going to win on Amazon without having brand presence off of it. So, okay, this is a really important concept, because what a lot of people don't understand is that if you have people that know your brand and are coming to Amazon to purchase, what you just did is you secured, 1,000 units, 1,000 sales every month. That is
Hmm.
going to allow you to actually go get the incremental 500 that just bumped you to the first page. So if
Hmm.
you take away that 1,000, now you're at 500 and you're on fifth page,
Hmm.
right? I mean, literally, like that's the math. So it's without beating the drum for your brand off the platform, you are just going to have to try so much harder to win the customers that are
Yeah.
comparison shopping. So,
Hmm.
a lot of folks are really anti sending traffic, like their own traffic from off Amazon to Amazon, especially
Right.
when they have their own DTC. But what I will tell you is that if you are sending some of that traffic, which by the way, you can qualify those audiences in ways you can't do on Amazon when they're already there. I mean, you can do lookalike audiences, retargeting, all these other things, right?
Hmm.
If you can move an audience over to Amazon that has a high proclivity for purchasing, especially
Hmm.
your brand that you've already qualified, you just boosted your ability and your long-term organic return
Hmm.
on the platform, right? Because you
Hmm.
can count on those customers that, incrementally month over month that are going to come back to you and purchase again. And
Hmm.
now all of a sudden that, getting to that first page for a really high volume head term doesn't seem so out of reach anymore, because you have
Hmm.
customers you can rely on to come back to you consistently. And
Right.
now every new customer that you're winning is adding to your unit volume and informing that algorithm and helping you compete.
Right. Yeah. And this is something I see all the time as well. Like a lot of brands, especially startups, will be doing things like launching onto Amazon before they even have their own website necessarily, and they're counting on Amazon to, they've heard a lot of the get rich stories, or they know, some of the metrics around is 50% of e-commerce in the U.S., conversion rates are higher, etc. And they're pinning a lot of hopes and dreams on this one platform, and it can be, I mean, it is a powerful platform, but um, it's with how competitive the marketplace has gotten, having an omni-channel strategy seems to me to be one of the most important. It is the most important thing that you can do. It's one of the reasons I started this podcast
Right.
was
Right.
to bring different people into the conversation about, what's really working for brands in this space as far as hacking growth.
Yeah.
And just to speak to that point, are there any particular, so with lookalike audiences, it sounded like you're referring to social. What other platforms do you see working best in conjunction with Amazon?
I mean, so I want to say one thing. I mean, you can launch on Amazon and Amazon only and be successful, but it's really hard and you got to be really lucky. Like really lucky. Like I've seen it happen one time, once, and it that one is a case study in itself, I think. But for most, this goes back to your initial budget. Like you have to have enough, and we talked about this a little bit last week too, Luke, which was if you're going to do things, do them well. And if you can't do a lot of things well, do a couple things really well, like, and that's, that's not groundbreaking advice. Why it matters is because if you have a couple channels out there that you're trying to market through, if you're spread too thin, they're not going to have the impact or create the momentum or traction that you can build on. Yep. So focus on one or two channels that your customers live at. So the caveat is that it's go where your customers are at, number one, which if you don't got to have a good feel for that yet, go do some testing, and invest in that, because if you don't have a good feel for that, you're never going to be able to get the traction or start pouring, money into channels confidently, and you won't have anything to compare against. So, I do think social for Amazon in particular is probably the best channel. Like display is like much more down the road when you've got a brand that you're trying to go gain additional awareness for and you got bigger budgets to deal with. Search is interesting, but it's also more of a one-to-one deal where you're not getting kind of the network effect of your marketing that you maybe could.
Just to pause real quick, by search you're referring to Google.
Google, yeah. I mean, you Google search, Google Shopping, any of the other, Bing, whatever it might be, right? Because that doesn't affect your SEO. Like you're winning a one-to-one conversion, and so that's okay if you can do that profitably. But what I would recommend for brands early on is like, and this isn't right for everybody, but go build an audience, an organic audience socially. Go tell people who you are. I think there's a couple firms that are popping up that have micro influencers in droves that actually have some really cool like review feedback loops that are not necessarily incentivized, but they have a good passionate following of folks that the product really matters for, and they're speaking to 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people that are probably going to convert a lot higher than what some of your other channels would. And so I recommend going there first to the micro influencers, and actually if you don't have money to do it, go do it manually, like for yourself. Like go figure out how to build a social audience that is relevant for your brand, because that is going to actually just feed you for months and years to come. Because that network effect of getting more and more followers, sharing your content and sharing your story and getting the word out about your product, like the multiplicative effect of that is so much greater. And you're going to see that. And actually Amazon has an attribution program now, which a lot of people don't know about because it just came out of beta, but you can actually tag all of that social media to see what kind of halo effect you're having on Amazon. We used to have to do this really janky through their affiliate program and just set up like unique URL redirects and stuff. You don't have to do that anymore. You can actually tag it like you would any other media, any posts, anything like that, and see what the relative effect is on Amazon and start measuring and understanding that. And you can do all of that literally for free. If you want to go pay like social media influencers and micro influencers, if I'm spending budget, that's probably where I'm starting. Because you also get the huge bonus of getting some incremental reviews as well.
Gotcha. Yeah. So to wrap this, to sort of bring it together, we've talked about getting reviews early on. We've talked about optimizing. We talked about PPC and optimization and how they affect each other just a little bit. That alone is something we could probably spend an entire podcast talking about.
Definitely.
I want to ask you, because I know you do talk about this, I want to ask you about lifetime customer value and how to keep customers coming back on a platform that's kind of a black box.
Yeah. This is kind of it's a little bit of my pulpit because I think people miss this a lot. So one of the terms out there in the industry right now, and it has been, is TACO, which is total advertising cost of sales. There's platforms that use this, people use this. And what it does is it basically says, well, I spent this much in ads this month and I made this much on the platform overall. What was my total advertising cost of sale, right? Relative to the total. That's an interesting number, but it's still based on one-time purchase. And so what a lot of folks are missing, especially in the consumer goods space or in grocery and gourmet, health and health, anybody that has multiple purchases of your brand, if you're not a super high priced item, you are not seeing the full picture of how much that customer is actually worth to you over the lifetime of however long they stay with you. So theoretical example, let's say you have a $20 price point product and you spend $15 to win that customer. So let's say you have a 75% ACOS on non-brand terms, meaning like for all those head terms you were targeting, it's costing you 75 cents to make every dollar. You're like, man, I only have a 20% margin to begin with. After Amazon takes out its fees and everything else, like I'm in the red on this product. Okay. Super interesting, right? Because you're like, I can't sustain this. There's no way that this is going to work. What you are not seeing is that if you just won that customer and they come back to you 5 times, that's $100. Okay. Now you might have to pay incrementally to get them back by covering your own brand. And let's say, I want to make the math complicated, but they come back to you 5 times over the lifetime of their relationship with you. You get $100 in revenue from them and you paid $15 initially to acquire them. What's your ACOS? 15%. Okay. So 75% to 15% when you're actually looking at the lifetime in this, which by the way, in these types of industries, especially, the food, renewable goods, things like that, like they're going to come back to you if you do the right things to build the brand. And so, I talk about this a lot because I think people miss the whole picture of what you actually should be thinking about and how much you're willing to invest to acquire a customer for the first time. The ones that do it really well are talking to those customers all the time. I mentioned the feedback was like being able to email those folks that are first time purchasers, make them love you, like give them things, tell them your story, literally like win them over because you have something good to offer them. And if you do that, the biggest piece of this, which I would be totally remiss in not mentioning this. Now we're looking at the total lifetime value of the customer, right? That 75% ACOS didn't look great to begin with. It looks a lot better when you think if they're going to purchase from you 5 times and they're a new customer, right? What you're also not accounting for is that you just informed Amazon's algorithm that you are super relevant for smart water bottle. Okay. And if you are getting those conversions, your organic ranking should be improving as well. So every time you get that, there is a really virtuous feedback loop that is happening. And you're saying, okay, not only did I win a sale for a new customer, but I also informed the algorithm that I'm really relevant for this. And if my organic ranking improves because of that, and it should, because they're taking that into account, all of a sudden I'm going to have to pay less and less for that over time because of 2 things. Number 1, organically, you're showing up really high on the first page. And number 2, you're going to get more efficient in your ad spend because Amazon's going to reward you for that.
So let me ask you this: on a platform in which it is very much against TOS to offer incentives, you're talking about giving customers things, you're talking about really engaging with them in your brand. We're talking about a platform that limits the kinds of ways you can limit with customers, where you can opt out of receiving emails from sellers at all. On just a process level, how do you recommend actually, you have a brand, like I've bought from it once. How do you engage me? What is the method?
Yeah. I mean,
methods.
Yeah. On seller side, it's email is the best and most direct. Other than that, there's very few ways to do it. The couple things that you can do, the couple touch points, is respond to every single review that comes in. Good or bad, doesn't matter. Bad ones you should be already been out ahead of, and you should be trying to mitigate those immediately. Good ones, good reviews, thank them, and tell them like we really appreciate it. And then through email though,
Can I
opt
pause
out.
you there just
Yeah,
for a second? So
go
all the
ahead.
reviews that come in, because there's a couple of different ways to get in touch with folks, and especially people are leaving reviews under pseudonyms, then it can be impossible to tell which order it came from. Are you talking about trying to get in touch, trying to thank them and mitigate the negative reviews? Obviously, for negative reviews, you want to mitigate this through email
Mhm.
as much as you can. But even with the positive reviews, are you suggesting finding who they are and messaging them directly in email? Or are you talking about simply commenting on the detail page?
Commenting
'Cause-
on the detail page to begin with. It's really hard to track down those reviews
yes,
because of your
yes.
point of the pseudonyms and things like that. But it doesn't matter if you respond to the review, they're going to get a notification and they're going to feel like you saw them, which that's all anybody ever wants. If they leave a bad review, like if they leave a negative review, it's because they just wanted to be heard. They want they want to know that you heard their feedback and that it matters. And if you can tell them that, because it does matter, they will get a notification that happened. I mean, it's just, it's kind of 101. It's like, just be a human, like talk to them, and those are the brands that I've seen just do really, really well, is the ones that are committed to really great customer service from the very beginning. And that's what they spent the most time on. And email opt-outs aside, like if you can get those emails delivered, which, a good chunk of them are going to go through. When I say give them something, I don't mean give them something and ask for a review. I mean, give them something because they're an awesome customer. So if they come back their third time, if they purchase 3 times from you, you're like, you're a great customer. You just made me $100. And I know that because the average, the average order value in my catalog. And, I feel like you deserve something. Like, here's a 50% off code for your next purchase, right? Like, just make them happy, like, make them love you. And it's going to go a long way. Because that word of mouth is something that you can't track, but I've seen a couple brands that have no other presence other than Amazon are now at the, 20, 30, 50,000 impression mark, for their own brand terms, which is, a huge asset.
And all just through effective customer engagement, just being the brand that customers fall in love with.
That's it. It really is. It sounds simple. It's a lot of work and it's very manual, but it is so worth it. It's so worth it. If you do anything like inventory, reviews. Yep.
All right. I hear you. So is there anything else that we want to add to lifetime value of a customer and how to keep them coming back, or for Amazon purposes specifically, because this could branch into a much wider discussion, but for Amazon specifically, responding in every way possible on the review side, and then just trying to engage through email where appropriate. Is there anything else that you recommend doing?
Understand what people order, understand, like, and this is kind of hard to get to, but in the orders data, you can pull that data and see, like, okay, if somebody orders this, they commonly order this next. Or if they've ordered, like, you can get really smart about this, especially with the triggers that I mentioned with feedback quiz now, like first time purchasers, second time purchasers. If you have a good understanding of what that mix is, you can start anticipating what they should come back for. And start rewarding them for that. You can start incentivizing them for that. The second that a person becomes a second time purchaser from you, you all of a sudden made a heck of a lot more profit than you did the first time. So everybody knows that it's way more expensive to acquire a new customer, or it's way more expensive to, let's see if I can say this right, acquire a new customer than keep a returning one, right? So do the work to keep the returning one by understanding what they purchase and what their patterns are. And if you do that, if you get really close to that information, it's not going to be just relevant for Amazon. It's going to inform, like, all your other channels and how people shop through it. Right. And that's really, really important to understand. It's like, what are the combos of things that people purchase from us? Like, what are we communicating that we have other really great stuff, but they only found this one thing? Like, cross-sell, upsell, downsell through your catalog to make sure that they know and educate your customers so that they know how these products complement each other. I think that's a really important thing. Like, is it clear in your customer's mind why these products exist? And you should have a very clear understanding of that based on your line mapping, right?
one thing that I want to point to, especially in food and beverages, is variety packs tend to do very well. I mean, it's hard to speak in absolute rules, but it's been rare that I've seen that
Mhm.
not be effective. People really like online specifically, and grocery. This actually, and like physical grocery stores, this can actually be very different. But online, especially, people like to
Mhm.
try different things, especially for a deal.
Right.
One of the ways that I've one of the things that I've implemented with a lot of clients and other and just advice that I've given to some brands who are trying to really uh, develop their brand presence and get customers to actually order multiple things in your catalog is to have a you can experiment with things like having a semi-permanent discount for buy one get X% off of something, and that's something that's like you set that up and that's not manual to keep going. You just have a begin date and an end date, and you can measure whether or not people are actually using it,
Right.
and you can see what percentages are actually working for you. And it all depends on your margins and all these other things, but
Mhm.
there's uh, brand building in Amazon. Pat, once we're past all of the optimizations, um, a lot of it can be very, in my experience, it's a lot of it can be very time consuming, and there's some like backbends that you kind of have to do in order to try to make that happen. Um,
Maybe just a soundbite to add to that, Luke, too, because I
mhm,
think you hit on it. But for folks that listen in, I mean, if you are cash poor, if you're tight on cash at the time,
mhm,
use your inventory as a marketing tool. So one thing we haven't mentioned at all are the giveaways and promos, right? You
right.
already purchased the inventory,
Mhm,
right? And there are, I don't want to get too far into this because this is like a whole nother, lever to pull. But
mhm,
you mentioned it is like, look, if you set up these coupons and these promotions, like I think what we're talking about is not only understanding how people purchase through your
mhm,
catalog and what they purchase in combination, it's also understanding their customer life cycle. It's
right.
like, as they mature and as they understand your brand and they kind of navigate through it, start to kind of just get a feel. Like you can do this through your orders analysis to kind of understand like what are they going to consistently purchase next, like as they're getting maybe tired of my brand, what can I bring to them that's new. And you can start building those workflows into your point about like, okay, if I know that they always buy the lemon lime 20 count, and it's
Mhm,
like, okay, well from there, maybe if I get them to try passion fruit for the first time, that's actually going to be a win because they're going to come back for that one instead. And that is it. Kind of full circle on your variety pack comment is just simply when people first land on a brand, they don't want to pay a ton to try it, and they want to get a good
mhm,
idea for how they want to get a good idea for what is all available. The variety pack is an awesome entry point into the brand. Now once you get them to buy the variety pack, what you have to optimize for is what should they buy next.
mhm,
And if you understand that about your second time purchasers, like if you look at their second order and usually it's this flavor in this count at this time, that's a trigger, right?
mhm,
30 days after, they typically trigger this flavor in this serving size, throw them a 10% discount. And if you
mhm,
can get them in as a second time customer, your LTV just changed incrementally,
mhm.
and actually probably pretty significantly.
Yep. No, this is I love all this. This is the kind of as this marketplace has heated up. This is exactly the kind of granular work that a lot like I don't see a lot of marketers or a lot of agencies going to this length. Like
They
it's
just
a rare
can't.
thing. It's a rare thing to dive this far into the conversation with a lot of these folks because it's still like we're still in the days where it's very very recent memory of you could get onto Amazon and do anything as long as it's a reasonably good strategy
Mm-hmm.
and succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And now we've gotten to a point where in particular as we've mentioned a couple of times for small brands who are just trying to like figure out like how to thread the needle to success, um, diving farther and farther into the metrics is and doing um, a lot of these extra measures really does pay off because you're going to talk to a lot of people who are going to have some very like simple strategies that have worked, but we're entering into a point where even if you're a brand that is established, like you have to start thinking a lot more about these numbers than you had to in the past.
Yeah. It comes back to the omni-channel as well, which is like have a coordinated strategy, like know where Amazon fits. If it's this island thing that nobody understands and it just kind of operates on its own, it's not going to be nearly as successful, and neither will your brand, right? Because you're also winning new customers for your brand that now know about it, that you can leverage in some different ways, right? But I think it's just it kind of comes back to the comment of like, choose a couple things and do them really well. You don't have to do it all, but you kind of, there are some kind of sequence of events. We talked about them a little bit, about getting some things, your house in order to start with. But I think what's more important is like what a lot of people do is they're like, well, I set that up and then I forgot about it for 6 months. And what you really have to do is like, even if you're focusing on one thing, maybe it's a couponing workflow or something like that, just continue iterating on it. Just continue to make it better as you gather more data and you understand more things, both through your orders data as well as your advertising data, to just make it a little bit smarter and make it a little bit better. I think I think a lot of folks just kind of let it be for too long. And part of this too, Luke, is you and I both know this really well, is like, look, the agency dynamic with a brand is that you can't do it all. There's just no way to do it. And so the brands have a little bit higher burden to kind of figure out how to handle these things internally and develop this competency, but then they're also going to rely on agencies to fulfill on a couple other things. And I could talk kind of ad nauseum about this, but it's just that the alignment is not perfect yet. And even agencies and brands alike, they do not yet fully understand how Amazon is different. So Amazon is much more like your D2C site than it is like your Google advertising, and I say that because your operations greatly affect your ability to grow and market. And so if you don't have those things right, everything else you do is going to be, kind of hamstrung. And it's not going to be nearly as effective as it would be otherwise. And so you kind of got to grow in stages. You got to do the fundamental things first. You got to then start leveling up to some of the other programs that are available. And then you got to start getting analytical about, how you're approaching the platform and really get intimate with, how your customers perceive your product.
Right. No, I totally, I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. So I'm just looking over a couple of other questions that I have you while I have you here. So for brands that, maybe they're doing some of the number crunching and they realize that, we don't really have the budget to compete with a lot of these, with a lot of the competitors, right off the bat. Or maybe they don't even have a budget to get into PPC at all, right now. Would you still advise getting on Amazon?
No.
Really? Not at all?
Look, I mean, you show me the numbers, right? I mean, first, but if you don't know where your break-even point is on Amazon, don't start. You better build that model first, right? Because if you are investing in inventory and a whole lot of other things and you're cash strapped and you need to sell 3,000 units before you're even close, like you need to be really realistic about how long it's going to take you to sell those 3,000 units and whether or not you can carry the capital burden, right? Like whether that's interest or otherwise, because there's a lot of brands that have had kind of the kiss of death because they didn't have enough cash flow to get to the next inventory turn and certainly didn't have any money to market or, build momentum on Amazon. Now that's kind of an extreme and I don't want to sound like an alarmist in any way, shape or form. All I'm saying is that I think the general perception is that Amazon, is set it up and you'll get sales. And we just,
no, that's not what I was getting at.
No. I mean, but I think that's a pretty prevalent perception out there. And I mean, the reality is though, is that you have to be strategic about, and you just have to be realistic about what you want it to be. If that's all it is to you, if it is just like, I'm going to have some inventory there that I can cover, I'll merchant fulfill it for now. Like I'll fulfill it myself. That's okay. just know what you're like, just be realistic about your goals. Like, and actually getting started. I mean, even if you don't have a marketing budget, so I'll take back my strong statement to begin with. But it's simply like, don't incur the fees of Amazon fulfillment, which you need to probably be Prime, which is a whole nother discussion. But figure out which products are actually have the margin available for you to make any kind of money on Amazon. Yeah.
So let me describe. Let me run this by you, and by all means, feel free to disagree. But even for small startups that don't necessarily have they maybe they're getting their manufacturing sort of like certain aspects of that, their operations squared away. There's a lot of reasons why people might not be ready to invest the sheer amount of money that you need to invest in PPC over time to really see that return. I have still recommended, and it always depends on the circumstance, but there's a lot of different reasons that I've recommended having a store on Amazon anyways, and it's been for the following reasons. And it always depends on where you are as a brand and what you're ready for. But just to have a presence on Amazon is relatively low. If you have a store on Amazon, then it keeps resellers from eating your lunch, because even if you're a relatively small brand, someone can get on there, misrepresent your brand, and then you can collect bad reviews just because a product was described incorrectly, and that can be a long and annoying, at minimum, problem to fix. And the other reason is, as all of these marketplaces evolve, like e-commerce is now impacting retail and vice versa. So, a majority of Americans will research products online before buying them physically, and the majority of product research is on Amazon. It's more than Google now. And so the very, very, very bare minimum incremental strategy that I've been suggesting to some brands has been, look, you have a website up. If you're really early on, you don't have much of a budget, it's probably not a great website. Being on Amazon can legitimize you in the eyes of a lot of consumers. They'd rather buy off Amazon than buy off your own site. And you can start to collect reviews that will impact your sales both on and offline. And now there's a lot of different things that impact this. Like if you think you're going to have a big marketing budget soon, and you're going to be able to push on Amazon really strongly with a powerful launch, then I suggest holding off. But if we're talking about a company that does not necessarily have investment on the horizon, that is going to need to incrementally build, period, no matter what they do, then often I will suggest, like, hey, like, there is a way that you can use this tool, that you can use this platform in a more minimal sense that will help.
Yes.
Is this something that you agree with, or would you wildly disagree for various reasons? Please feel free to do either.
No, no, you're spot on, Luke. Like everything. Grit. When
Sorry,
you
can you
asked
say that
me,
again? I think that the connection busted up there for a second.
I said you were right. Just so you know. No, but that's the gist. No, when you asked me the initial question, like, would you advise startup brands to get on the platform? I think I come out strong on that for two reasons. Number one is because the small brands they often don't realize like the task that they have ahead of them.
Right.
So if they have somebody help guide them, like, that's helpful. Number two, I was also imagining more of a firm that, like, very, very small, has no Amazon understanding, doesn't have anybody to help them. And the reason I don't advise those folks, I think everybody you described in what you just said are the ones that are ready to do it and should be there for all the reasons you mentioned, right? The ones that I don't want on the platform yet are the ones that aren't going to watch the reviews and aren't going to keep inventory in stock.
I've seen it. It's nasty.
You are going to do way more damage to your brand and yourself if you are not watching it. If you have and so it comes down to your internal resources and your bandwidth. Like, you need to have somebody dedicated to the channel. And if you do, I mean, they can do other things, but this is like going to be a big task. Like if you do not have somebody identified to run Amazon and be responsible for it, it's going to get messy, and it's going to be harder to recover from. To your point about like, also like you don't want resellers to start taking, capitalizing on your brand presence. Like, yes, agreed. I mean, once you have enough brand presence for a reseller to be like, oh, I only want to like, jump on that. Yes, you should be on Amazon. I'm talking like very early stage when you only have a few folks in-house that are doing a whole lot of things at once, and they're throwing stuff up on Amazon and hoping that it works without like kind of paying attention to the customer service aspect of it. It's the reviews. That's what it comes down to for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an interesting discussion because like there's a lot of consultants and marketers out there that will refuse to work with, like they'll only want to work with brands that are doing like 50K a month at least or something like this, or they will advise against launching online until you have a certain amount of budget. But just talking with the amount of startup founders that I do, and just seeing how the platform behaves, it seems like there is an increment, like there are incremental ways to still use the platform to success, as long as you, one, have someone to actually watch it and take care of it, like you just said, and two, you are extraordinarily clear on what is realistically possible for what you're putting into it. And this gets, again, wraps back into to omni-channels we were talking about. If you're this early on, there are tests on social you can do for product validation and audience testing that are enormously important. And it depends on what resources you have at the time and what most of all is working for you as you test and you go. Like at the end of the day, we're forming hypotheses and testing them and then going with what's working well. But I am a big supporter of finding the best way to use this tool, and that there are tried and true, there are rules to the game. There are ways to use it and ways not to use it. But one really, really interesting topic to me is, as the marketplace gets more complicated, what does a large brand strategy look like that does have a war chest and can just like gun after a lot of these head terms and try to dominate them from the outset, versus the small guy that's coming on there, and like there's a lot of these mom and pop shops, like they're staking a lot. They're staking a lot on their success, the success of their brand. And the differences between what those two strategies are is enormously interesting to me.
Yeah, it's a huge topic. I mean, generally speaking, I think the difference is, for smaller to mid-sized brands, is you need to be more focused into whatever strategies. So whether that's in that applies to PPC, it applies to your omni-channel efforts, it applies to your product and catalog. Be more narrow and more focused on a couple things and do them very well. For a large brand will often have way more data to work with. And so for a large brand, okay, couple of things. Connect your channels as best you can. So that includes the attribution program, leveraging some of the DSP data. It includes, building out, your email workflows, that are very similar to what you're doing on your D2C site, coordinating your promotions and advertising across the channels to make sure they're consistent. Like if you're running a deal here, are you running a deal here? Like, so for a big brand, I think it first starts with like connect the dots where you can. So draw your Venn diagrams of where these data points cross over. And then secondly, like to really level up, start leveraging the data. You are going to have a ton of information about how people think about your product, talk about your product, review your product, buy your product, in what mix. And then you're going to have a bunch of information from your website about your CRM and your database and your audience chemistry and your makeup and what they buy and how they do it, what channels they're in. I think it becomes much more of like when you are doing something in one channel, let's call it Amazon, are you using the data you have in other channels to inform it?
Yep.
And vice versa, because Amazon, in my opinion, is a rich source of data that a lot of people do not pay attention to. It's conversion data that you aren't going to get anywhere else. Like they're telling you how well you convert on a search phrase for something that really matters for your product and for your brand. Like it's a ton of information about product validation in your reviews. Like, what are the things that people are getting stuck on or hung up on? Like, that might be something you need to go fix in manufacturing and product design. So it's like, I think you have a plethora of data. You have to organize that data and then use that data to basically inform what you're doing in both Amazon as well as in your other strategies. I think those are the biggest differences, is that you can go a lot wider as a large brand. So therefore use those layers of data to like inform those things. As a smaller brand, like be narrow and like and focus your efforts, because it kind of all comes back to, are you having compounding growth? Basically, like the dollar you spend in ads, are you getting like compound returns out of that? Or are you spread way too thin to have any kind of impact on the platform?
Right.
Yeah.
Just one or two more questions for you. What is a current challenge in your own business?
All of it. I mean, yeah, literally. Like, I think our challenge, Luke, is that, how do I say this? We're building a product and we're not really sure yet who our customer is, which I shouldn't even say that out loud. I might have to have you edit that out. But no, I mean, look, we came from the agency side, so we're solving agency problems first. But we also had a lot of time to delve into these problems. And so we're still kind of trying to figure out where we can provide the most value for folks. And so it's, we're caught a little bit in between, people just needing a bid automation tool and the analytics layer that we've built that really helps you level up your game to the next stage. And conversations that are much more informed. Like, people just aren't there yet. So we have to reform our thoughts a little bit and meet the market where it's at. And, I think we're doing that in some of the changes that we have coming out in our platform, but we're very early, we're still just trying to talk to people and listen to people. And I think it's just gathering the right people in the room to understand like what direction we need to go.
Right.
Yeah.
And finally, where can we find you? Website, social?
Yeah. LinkedIn is the best place. Like, hit me up. I'm very active there and just talking to people. I love the conversations that happen there. Sam Hager, Hager on LinkedIn. sam.hager@-applications.com. Like, shoot me a line. We do training and consulting as well. So, I mean, if you have questions, throw them my way. I mean, I'm happy to help. Like, I try to help everybody that I can, cause I also just think there's a responsibility to put good information out there.
Yeah.
Because I think there's some bad information out there, not just like from folks in the Amazon world, but from folks that don't understand the Amazon world. And so I try to just be a good purveyor of good information. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time here. This is a ton of fun. Super happy to have you on. And and until next time.
Absolutely, Luke. Thanks for having me. And, best of luck with all the brands.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You too.
Sure, man.
Take care.